ultimate debate shows, huh? Straight out of The Sopranos.
Best of 7, best of 9, best of 15. Sign me up for it all in May. Bucks Heat. They actually haven't had great postseason series the last 2 years. This year, it's got to be different. Neither of these teams know how to die. Last night, the Milwaukee comeback. Holiday, the game winner. Harry Lyles Jr. around the horn to you. What did the Bucks show you? What did the Heat not show you last night? What did you leave the game thinking about these two teams?
Well, the Heat showed us one of the worst collapses in the regular season so far this year. Teams that have been down 14 points or more with 6 minutes to go in a game have been 2-488 this season. So credit the Bucks, though. They also showed us the reason why they are the defending champs. And I think one thing that's really important here in that game is Mike Budenholzer, right? Like, we all know great coaches are able to draw things up late in games, and that's usually where we give them credit for. But I want to give him credit for knowing when to get out of the way, and that's what he did at the end of the game. He let his guys, Giannis, he let Chris Middleton, and he let Drew Holiday just kind of run the show. You have three guys who you should all feel comfortable with the last shot in, and it worked out for him because he didn't give Eric Spoelstra, one of the 15 best coaches in NBA history, no chance to set up his defense. I thought it was great.
Ramona Shelburne, your takeaway is more about Milwaukee, more about Miami?
I think it's more about Milwaukee. I mean, they really put the clamps on, and you can call it a collapse if you want by the Heat, but the Heat were shooting the lights out, and the Milwaukee defense really stepped up down the stretch there. And I think also we forget with Milwaukee, they're 26-8 when their big three plays. They're really those three players when they get on the court together, as they were in the finals. That is that championship team, and you saw them make plays at the end. And for Giannis, I thought it was a victory for him as well, because Miami is the one team that he has not had success against. Bam Adebayo usually does a great job on him. They went and got PJ Tucker. Giannis had a good game last night and finally broke through against the Heat.
Bob Ryan.
I had just seen a clip of Giannis earlier in the morning or either late the day, sometime in recent hours, in which he was playing the disrespect card with that team. And that people don't appreciate it. So it was a direct question. He answered. And then the next question was, do you think you can win with this team? And he said, yes, absolutely. And I think that was the heart of a champion, to borrow the Woody Tomjanovich phrase, that we saw more than anything else. And some breaks and a referee decision that helped them, create a jump ball that turned out to be lead to the winning basket. All these things come into play. And, oh, by the way, as it has been alluded to, they were shooting ungodly, Miami. It had to end. And Jimmy Butler was 2 for 14. It's not going to happen.
He went 30-plus minutes without scoring. He did not buttle last night. Israel, you're making a face here. What you got?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to catch up on, Tony. The series were short the last 2 years, but the games were good. Harry, I just kind of want to point out that the Knicks lost a couple, I think, 28-point leads in this season.
Yes,
just
all right,
recently.
yeah.
So this collapse wasn't really that bad in the grand scheme of things, especially when you consider, look, what I got from this game was, hey, if this is an Eastern Conference Finals, great, it's going to be fantastic. Now, it's a loaded at the top of the Eastern Conference, so who knows? But you look at this game, you can't really judge one team or the other. The Heat did all that. You mentioned Jimmy Butler not having, scored since the first quarter. Well, it's what Milwaukee does. Take away the inside, let them shoot outside. The Heat made some shots. Without Kyle Lowry on the floor, that's probably the biggest difference at the end of the game. That's the guy you want, your quarterback. That's the guy, whether he's inbounding or not, he's going to keep the team in line. So that probably doesn't end that way if Kyle Lowry's in the game. But these two teams are like neck and neck. And so obviously, if they were to meet in the playoffs, it'd be great. There's just not that much to glean from this one performance, other than a Miami Heat team that's number one in the Eastern Conference should not be ending games that way, and they have a tough time finishing games. This isn't the first time, so that's something they definitely need to consider fixing.
So there was not a lot to take away from last night, but you managed to talk for 60 seconds straight while taking 3 breaths. Israel Gutierrez started his stat point, too. A lot to correct here, Tony. It was a good take from Gutierrez. He's in the lead. We'll move on. Miami gets Brooklyn tonight, so they're on the back-to-back. And the expected return of Kevin Durant. How much has Brooklyn needed this? And that's the 8th seed right now, closer to 11 than they are 6. The game is in Brooklyn, so no Irving and no Ben Simmons as well. Ramona, you reported this week. Simmons is week to week. So you could report that week to week. Mama, what are your expectations for Brooklyn and Durant tonight?
Okay, so they were first in the East when Kevin Durant got hurt, and then he got hurt, and they have the second worst record in the league and the worst record in the Eastern Conference since he's been hurt. I think he's going to help. I mean, he's the guy. And I don't know that you could even – I don't think you could even count on Ben Simmons at this point because he hasn't played basketball in over 8 months. So if you're waiting for Ben Simmons to walk through that door and really change fortunes for the Brooklyn Nets, that's not the guy. Kevin Durant is the guy. He was, at the time he injured his knee on January 15th, I think he was right at the top of the MVP race. Mm-hmm. But he's been out so long and the team has really fallen off. And now he becomes the stabilizer. The only question is how many minutes are they going to let him go?
Right. That's my next question. Exactly. How many minutes tonight? What are we looking at for a ramp up over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks? While, again, I say they're closer to out of the play-in one way than out of the play-in the good way. You know, go ahead, Momo.
I think Kevin has been able to come back for a little while now, but they wanted to wait and trust him to say, I'm ready. So he's been in practice, and players have seen him say, he looks really good to me. But the fact that he didn't rush back in until now and said, I'm ready, that actually is heartening for me as somebody who's watched him, and especially the injuries that he's had over the last few years.
Harry, expectations for Durant tonight?
Hey, look, as long as he's on the floor, I think that's great. And to Ramona's point, the fact that he took his time with this injury is massive because he's shown you he could come back from an Achilles injury and play his best basketball. So the fact that he's taken the time with this injury, they're 5-17 with him not on the floor. The fact that he's coming back, no matter what happens tonight, this is a great day for the Nets. Obviously, you're going to be playing a Heat team that's going to be wanting to make up for their loss last night against the Bucks. But the fact that Durant's back, it looks like you're probably going to end up having Kyrie for home games at some point, and maybe if you're lucky, you get Ben Simmons at some point. I think no matter what happens tonight, we're going to see a good Kevin Durant, but long term, this looks good for the Nets.
Harry, you just heard Ramona say, don't wait on Ben Simmons, yet you happily wait on Ben Simmons. Israel Gutierrez, how about you?
I'm an optimist.
I like that.
Yeah, I think we're going to see the offensive player that Kevin Durant we're used to seeing already, kind of because he already came back from a more serious injury. And when he did that, he was more focused on his offense, letting himself get into a rhythm and not really worrying as much about being this great defensive player. I think that's what you're going to see from him in these first few games. Just make sure he gets into an offensive rhythm. I do think it's a good opening test against the swarming Heat team, although half their roster is questionable tonight, so who knows who's going to play. I thought it was an interesting quote where he said, I'm not going to be a savior. Because you kind of have to be, right? For them to be not in the play-in, which is a dangerous place for the 1 and 2 seeds to consider a healthy Brooklyn Nets team in the first round. But for them to not get in there, he's got to do his thing. He's got to elevate his team. It just depends on how healthy he is because he clearly has the ability to.
And Bob Bryant.
Well, first of all, welcome back, Kevin Durant. It's always nice to have one of the historically great players back. And he's, as has been alluded to by my colleagues, he already set a world record for fastest recovery from an Achilles. I expect him to come back over/under 29. Okay? Over/under on points,
okay.
29.
All right. So you think he comes back full strength and he comes back full time?
Now, one other thing. Some of the lineups, I mean, just nice for the fans to have a team to look at, a great player. Some of the lineups that Steve Nash has been forced to put on the floor could easily have been replicated had he gone to a local YMCA at noontime and said, hey, yo, you guys want to play tonight? So, I mean, it's been unbelievably pathetic, some of these performances that Nets have had. And so, obviously, having him back makes a difference.
Ramona, you did the reporting on Ben Simmons. Just one follow-up, if I can ask you. You're not reporting your opinion here. This is what you're hearing from the team, that he's week to week and not to depend on a comeback in March or this year at all.
I think he'll be back at some point this year, but he ramped it up last week. He had a setback with the back injury, and they typically like to have players go at least a week of hard, full contact practices before they clear them to return to the court. So this idea that he's going to play Thursday in Philadelphia for that comeback game, I think you can write that off right now. And then if he doesn't play there, when are you looking at? We're getting down to where you have 10 games left in the year. I mean, it's run out of real estate.
We'll move on. Sixers 123, Knicks 108. 3-0 with Harden, and it's the Maxey Max you're seeing as well here. Embiid, Harden, and Tyrese Maxey averaging a combined 85 points per game together in those 3 games. Israel, you were there last night after 3 games. Are you calling these new Sixers a success? Are you calling them the favorite in the conference? What are you calling them?
Not quite a favorite yet. They're definitely a success. I'd like to see them against better teams. The Knicks and the Timberwolves are 17th and 16th in defensive ratings, so that's bottom half of the league. So probably not the best defensive test. I do want to see when teams swarm Joel Embiid, how James Harden reacts, and vice versa. I do think defensively there might be some question marks, but they should be good enough with Joel Embiid anchoring there. And I just think Tyrese Maxey is such a wild card there as a number 3 scorer, jumping ahead of Tobias Harris even, just the way that they play, so he can sort of fill those gaps. I think they're really good. 1 or 2 in the East is how they're probably going to
Bob, you have a one takeaway you're seeing in these 3 games with Harden?
This is Daryl Morey's greatest fantasy coming true right before his eyes about what could happen if he puts those 2 guys together. And with Maxey, who's had 3 straight 20-point games, I'm encouraged. If I'm a Philadelphia fan, I'm encouraged. Of course, it's not definitive. Of course, they haven't played all the great teams. Of course, they got a soft spot in the schedule. But it's exactly what you thought it might look like. It's a blueprint you're looking at. How can you not be excited?
So they are who they might thought they might be.
Yes.
Okay, I'm following you. Ramona Shelburne, one takeaway from these 3 games.
I think it's better than we all expected because I think there were some natural fit issues with Joel Embiid's not exactly a guy who runs a pick and roll and dives and tries to dunk the ball. He's actually tried to do that with James Harden. James Harden is not a great catch and shoot guy. He's tried to do that in this system. You see both of them really excited and happy to be there, but we've seen this. James Harden looked happy in Brooklyn too after the first 3 games. So,
Harry Lyles Jr.
Yeah, I think this is a success, and I think a lot of Sixers fans today feel validated for what they wanted out of the Ben Simmons trade, and a big part of that was keeping Tyrese Maxey, and you're seeing the reason why for that. Between Maxey, Harden, and Embiid, you have a team or a trio that is plus 45.6 in net efficiency. That's the highest of any trio in the NBA since the post-All-Star break. And to just watch Tyrese Maxey shoot with confidence, that Harden step back that he had last night,
so
acting like he was the absolute best player on the floor, I thought was great.
All right. Maxey to the max. Here's our horn taking a break right here by herself. Coming up, NFL Combine, we're talking hand size. Let's take a look, national panel. Hold up your hand towards the camera. What are we working with here?
If I hold them closer to the camera, they look bigger.
How do I make them look bigger? Because they're not.
Buy or sell next.
Hey guys, family.
Maybe you remember this from 2 years ago. Tweet. Considering retirement after I was informed the football will be slipping out of my tiny hands, please keep me in your thoughts. That was Joe Burrow responding to the combine hand measurement, which we talk about every year. Burrow was at 9 inches, by the way. He's smallest in the league right now with Jared Goff. Turned out okay, right? Today, Pittsburgh's Kenny Pickett measured in at 8.5 inches. There hasn't been a quarterback make a roster in the NFL that size in 5 years. Kuiper and McShay both have Pickett as a first-rounder. Both have him going number 11 in recent mocks. Here's Pickett's college coach Pat Narduzzi's take. If they want to measure anything, what they should do is open heart surgery. Go check and see how big the chest cavity is and how big the heart is inside that chest if you really want to analyze. Wow, that is a great quote. Harry, how does hand size affect his draft status?
I'm buying that it might affect it, but I'm selling that it should. He still threw for 42 touchdowns and was a Heisman candidate. And hey, look, if that's the criteria, sign me up, baby. I'm out here. I could be an NFL quarterback.
Break. You're at 9 3/4
6'2", 190.
Which is, with Dak Prescott's at 10 inches. Israel Gutierrez, how about you?
I'm at 8.5, so I've got Kenny Pickett hands, which means I could play in the NFL. Because you know what else helps quarterbacks from fumbling? A really good offensive line so you don't get hit all the time. So, yeah, you're not going to blindly draft the fastest wide receiver. You're not going to blindly draft the strongest defensive lineman. Hand size, probably not as big a deal. Michael Vick had this size of hand, and he seemed to throw it pretty nice.
Bob Ryan?
Once upon a time, scouts watched guys play football and made judgments based on the performance on the field, the results that they achieved, and then Gil Brandt instituted all this nonsense of timing this and hurdles and cones and he drafted a guy once from Boston College because he ran a great 40 and if I breathed on him he would have fallen down. So I'm off for Kenny Pickett.
Ramona Shelburne.
Oh, that was great, Bob. You know what? You're making me recall. Jerry West once said Magic Johnson wasn't going to be a good player in the NBA because he was too tall to be a point guard. too tall. 6'9". Like these measurements, they don't always mean what you think they mean. Like in the NBA, they measure hand size from the tip of your thumb to your middle finger. In the NFL, it's to your pinky. How much does the pinky even affect things? Dak Prescott had the most fumbles in the NFL last year. He had 14 fumbles. His hands are 10 inches.
And I think the NBA also measures from the top of the pinky or middle finger down to the wrist as well. Which
to the wrist. Yeah.
That's the other measurement. Which helps you if you're like taunting somebody and you want to give them the middle finger, I guess. I don't know. But one more size question, which may be of import, is Evan Neal, who could go #1 overall. He weighed in at 337 pounds. Is this the trimmest 337-pounder you have ever seen in your life? I mean, he and I could wear the same pants, I think. Unbelievable.
Aaron Donald out there.
He's 6'7". Kind of helps as well. We're going to move on. Of all the responses to the WNBA charter flight scandal, as written up by Howard Megdal in Sports Illustrated this week, it was this one from Phoenix Mercury guard Shea Petty. They're over there living the life while we're fighting to see whose Southwest ticket has A185 on it. So it's a league scandal for treating your players too well. It's kind of fascinating when you think about it like that. WNBA threatened to terminate the New York Liberty. Have you ever heard that before as a punishment? Owner Joe Tsai circumventing the CBA, paying out of pocket and flying the team charter the second half of last season, and also to a team-building trip to Napa, which the team very much put on social media. In the end, it was a $500,000 fine. Israel, do you see this as a scandal of a team trying to overcompensate players and circumvent the CBA, or do you see it as a scandal of a league not meeting its players and some owners' hopes in terms of growth?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more of the latter. I do think you have to fine or penalize them for doing something against the CBA, right? That's collectively bargained. You broke a rule. Okay, fine. But to have the discussion about how these athletes should be treated, and they talked about comparisons to women's basketball players, professionals overseas, and how they are floating around in charter jets as opposed to commercially, and they should be able to do the same. And you want to talk about the cost? Yes, well, Joe Tsai's trying to get it sponsored and trying to get that cost covered. But even if they can't, they need to find a way to help these athletes perform at their peak. And yes, some of this travel is a part of that. So they need to find a way to creatively get the money if that's what they need to do.
Bob Ryan.
When I first saw this story, I went, what kind of world is this? What is wrong with flying charter? Now I'm hearing all these stories. Some teams can afford it, some can't. Look, you mean to tell me that if a company, a team's owned by a company or a guy, and he already has a chartered plane, his private plane, he can't fly his team on it? I do not get it. They got to work this out. No, he shouldn't be fined a penny for doing something right for his players.
Ramona Shelburne.
Well, look, it'd be one thing if Joe Tsai just circumvented the salary cap and CBA by doing this, but he's actually working on the problem, and he has been for 2 or 3 years now. This has been sitting out there. It needs a resolution. He's obviously on the right side of history. It's going to cost him in the pocketbook. It's $15 million we're talking about here. That's all it costs for the whole league to fly charter. Some company needs to step up and do this. The league needs to find a way to do it, because I understand that some owners can't afford it, but it's overdue.
You bring up that Tsai had been working on the problem. It's been reported that he has, but it's also being reported and said by Commissioner Engelbert that he did not propose it. He proposed it, but he did not actually officially propose what he would do with it. Harry Lyles Jr., I'll bring you in.
Yeah, this is a growing pain with the WNBA. I think that if there's a bright spot to look at here is that the WNBA has an owner like Joe Tsai that actually wants to treat his professionals, like the way that that NBA players are treated. And the fact that if it is true that he has tried to make this where, like, hey, he knows that all teams can't afford it, the fact that he's trying to find a way to make it happen to where everybody can get it, I think that is great that the league has an owner like that.
Have you ever heard a league threaten to terminate a franchise over what we're calling the biggest scandal in the WNBA? And you look over at other leads, you don't even need to mention names, and the scandals other leagues have, and this was, we want to treat our players well.
Mostly came from the other owners, though. It really was.
I understand, but Ramona Shelburne, Bob Ryan, showdown, 2 minutes.